Hello and well met. This is Layron with the Fantasy Grounds Academy. Today I'm going to continue with Chapter 1 work that I was doing earlier. Done about 2 or 3 episodes now. This will be Episode 3. I'm going to wrap up Chapter 1. Essentially, I went back and I fixed the assets that I had messed up in the second or first episode. So what I did is I created the assets for the horse and the wagon and such. Not only for a base with the token on it, but in this case, I also added a way that you can use it to add it to the map. So if I go to my heroic maps, these are the tokens, but I also added a new folder, and this was for the assets. So I didn't want to necessarily just have the tokens so you can move them around on the map, but I also wanted to have static images as well. So I did that with the horses and the wagons, just in case you don't want to mess around with moving it across the map. And what we did here is we put bases on these, but I had to create versions that didn't have the bases on them. So that's one of the things that I wanted to show. And then when I did it, the actual episode, last one or the one before, I forgot that I had already put the base on them. So I had to go back and fix that. So I went back into Canva and I re-exported that so that I was able to use them in Fantasy Grounds as a regular standard asset, not a token. So there's a difference between tokens and the assets that you're going to get with a given art set. So some of them are designated to be assigned to PCs and NPCs, and then some of it is just designated to be like static images that are on a map. So it just depends on what your needs are, your usages, that sort of thing. But what I really wanted to show was that you have to sometimes put in a little extra work if you're trying to achieve something in particular. So what I have is, this is my Canva thing. So I took the base off of it and I went ahead and ticked these and put them into Fantasy Grounds as assets instead of trying to use the one with the base on it, because those are more for token use. So there is a difference. The tokens cannot be accessed, or tokens can be accessed by players if you put them on the map for them, but assets cannot. Those are going to be under the player layer and they go onto the map. So that's like your trees and that sort of thing. So these things end up being like props, and they're not actually tokens per se, even though they could be labeled as tokens. So you got to put them in 2 different spots if you want to access them in different ways. So this makes it easier for the game master to have more options if you do it this way. Now, not every token needs to be an asset. It just some of these things, like these wagons, those sort of things. Siege engines, vehicles maybe, because you have some that are parked like along the side of a road or something. You're not necessarily going to interact with them. So that's when you would use it as an asset. But if you're going to move it around and let players take control of them, that sort of thing, then you'll want to put those in as tokens. So there is a different directory for each one of those in the Fantasy Grounds assets. So this is the campaign that I was working in last time. I'm going to bring up a map and show you what I was talking about. Before that, though, I'm going to take a look at the assets. And this is where I'm putting the content that I'm creating for the last couple episodes. So I wanted to kind of show you my process and then explain what's going on. So I basically have an images folder and a tokens folder. And within the tokens folder, there is a campaign folder, and this has the tokens that are unique to the campaign. So these aren't shared with all the campaigns, they're only a part of this one. If I wanted these tokens to be more at the top level where you can actually access them easier, I would put them in the data folder. But in this case, these are actually in the campaign folder. So from last week, this is essentially the ones that had tokens on them. I tokenized them so that when you put them on the map, they're more visible. And when you assign them to NPC or you just drag them to the map, they can be much easier to move those across the map if they're tokens, because they'll sit on the top layer. Now, if you have an image and it's in the campaign folder, these are static. So this is not going to allow the players to interact them. So this were your maps, your handouts, your decorations, you know, that sort of thing. So here are the assets that I had put into the game. Now, I didn't convert these over to WebP, which is what my next step would be, but I do want to show you what the difference is and, you know, why you would do that. I did kind of explain that a little in the last episode, but I'm going to go back over that. So I'm going to go over to the map that I had worked on. And this is one of 3 that I've got to put line of sight and all the details on. So if I go to the images folder, I'm going to select the group that I had made, which in this case, this is chapter 1. And now here are the assets without the base. So these are added in so that it's easier to access and that you can actually drag them to the map, and it's much easier to deal with it like this. So here's the empty wagon and the horses, and here's the wagon that has the content, the loot, I guess, or the supplies, and here's the one with the driver. So I went ahead and made those into assets, but right now they're still PNG files, but I want to show you the difference on that. So this is a step that you might take when you're going to incorporate a lot of different things. So chapter 1 is going to have all the maps. It's going to have these assets and maybe a handout or 2. So the second map that I had worked on was this. I think it's the main map. That's the Tribord Trail. So let me go to the road map. Okay, so this is the map for the first encounter. So this is the big important one here for the first encounter. So what I had done with this is obviously I put a grid on it, and in this case, the virtual tabletop version of the map is at 72 DPI. That's for printing, so it's a little lower quality. Fantasy Grounds recommends around 100 for assets and maps. And then the dimensions are kind of big. I mean, this is a pretty good sized map, but it's not overly so. And then the resolution, or the pixels per inch, is 70, which is half of 140, which is the standard size for Roll20 maps. So if you have Roll20 maps, those are usually at 140. But for larger maps, they went with 70 because, you know, it's a lot more file size, you know, larger. So there's something to keep in mind. It's good to know those dimensions and also the DPI for printing if you're going to print these off. Normally, you'd use a 300 DPI for high quality printing. But in this case, this is just for virtual tabletop use. So they cut it in half essentially, or into a third. So then what I did is I added the horses here onto the map and some blood drops. So I'm going to unlock the map. And first, let's take a look at the line of sight. So really not a whole lot of line of sight on here. Just the fact that these are just areas that I had quarantined off here, so that when the players come through here, they just can't see up and over these ridges. And this down here might actually be a downslope, and then this is an upslope. So you can do it like that. And then all I have is these terrain tools up here. So when the players go up the trails, I can just reveal that layer. So if I in gameplay, if you have this set like this, these are closed, which just means that it's going to block the vision. It's not going to block movement. But then when they get up there, I can just open that up so they'll be able to see through it from even if they're down below. So as long as one player has basically come up to the top, then I'll open these up, just the main layer, so that when they go up there, you know, they might describe what's going on up there. And once that happens, I don't care if the rest of the players can see that. It's just down when they're down on the road. I don't think they should be able to see up there yet. So that depends also on how high this is. I imagine this is at least, 8-10 feet tall, or a couple meters or something like that. So I'm not sure. There is no exact definitive answer for that, but basically I didn't have to put this layer in here, but I thought I would kind of add to it. And then there's also the trees. So there's trees that they shouldn't necessarily be able to see through unless they get close to it. So that's what I did there. And now on the bottom here for the props, the decorations and such, I have a folder that I made. And then inside the folder are the 2 dead horses and some blood splatters, which is going to be where evidence of that they were attacked and they're wounded. And then here's the black arrows like they describe in the adventure. So what I've done there is I have all the assets in here. And if you go to the layers tool, this is where you can add these sorts of static images. So here's the blood drop, for instance. And I have it locked so that they don't move on accident. But if I unlock this, I can actually move these layers around. So if I have it selected here and I have the selection tool, and you grab it in the middle, you can kind of move this around. But I left it here kind of by the wound, so it kind of makes more sense. And then this one obviously is on this side. So this is just kind of a way to kind of embellish this, make it look a little bit more set up like this. And these are static images. So I don't think these horses are going to get up anytime soon. So unless the players are going to bury them or resurrect them or something like that, I mean, they're going to be a part of the map. This layer cannot be accessed by the player. So this is something that you'll have to determine if you need that to happen or not. So these are all in a folder. And the reason for that is, one, to organize this list on the right so you don't have 50 million things in a row. So all these pertain to the 2 horses. And if I want to, if I unlock this, I can move this entire thing. It's like a scene almost. I can move it around on the trail. So if I don't like the positioning, maybe I'll move it somewhere else. But I kind of have it here in the center because what I'm going to do is each side of the road where the ambushers come from, there's going to be 1 melee attacker, 1 archer on each side. And what will happen is when the players go to engage the horses to check them out, the goblins will make their attack. And there'll be 2 that come up, or 1 that comes from here, 1 that comes from over here, and then there'll be someone up on one of these hills or hiding in the bushes shooting them with arrows. So there's 2 melee attackers, and then there's 2 arrows, someone who has a missile ranged weapons. So it can be a spear, but in the game, or the main game, the first edition of this Lost Mine of Phandelver, they had 2 guys with bow and arrow and then 2 guys like scimitars. But with the new tables that I incorporated into this that came from the heroic maps thing, there is some tables that I created that you can roll for personalities and such for these particular goblins. So you're just kind of making a better experience for your players, and you got more content to go on, especially if you're new to Fantasy Grounds and to D&D and such. It's nice to have more stuff that you can choose from, but with the risk of being a little bit complicated, because you don't want too much stuff because then you get distracted. But these goblin ambushers, there's a table here, and the GM can opt to use it. This is totally optional. This is kind of a sidebar thing. You don't have to use it, but basically you can choose the output type. You can go to story, you can go to parcel, or encounter. So I don't think the encounter makes sense because these are not really attached to any encounter. Chat would be okay, depending on how you have the chat area set up. I think in this case, story entry would be probably best. So if I roll on this, it's going to pop up a story entry, which I can keep as notes. So I might attach this to another note or something. But one of the goblins' name is Nibfickle. He's quick and accurate with his short bow. He sings like a rude goblin attack song and wears a black woolen cap with a peacock feather in it. So you could give this description of this guy, and then if you capture him, or if you hear them communicating with each other and you know Goblin, you'll know that his name's Nibfickle, and that's one of the personalities. So let's roll another one just to see what it does. Okay, so this second guy is Minful, which is he wields a sharp, broken longsword, has a toothless grin, and is notably fast on her feet. So this is a female, Minful, and she's kind of a melee attacker. So that's two personalities that you could have. I don't think I'd roll on the table more than 3 times because it has the potential of changing the output of range attackers versus melee. But it's still, at least 2 results. I think that would work well. And then you can kind of just pick some of the others if you want. But having a couple randomized rolls every now and then is fun. It kind of changes the pace of the encounter a little bit. It increases the replay value. So that's really one of the things that I like about tables and having them attached to the lore and the story. So they don't always have to generate treasure or monster attacks. They can just generate personalities and little story elements that will make this more fun, kind of randomizes it a little bit, and really increases the replay value. So if you run this adventure more than once, you're not repeating the same exact thing over and over and over. So anyway, so that's what we did. Last week's kind of a recap, but we didn't actually go into the map itself. I just kind of showed it. So all I did with this is add a little bit of terrain, occluders on here, created this asset here with the horses and everything, just kind of showcase what you can do with Fantasy Grounds with the map tools. These obviously were added in, the map and everything, and the grid. But this gives you an idea of what can be done with Fantasy Grounds, whether you bring in your own assets or you subscribe to their art subscription. So however you want to do it. But these are PNG files. So I want to convert these actually to WebM or WebP because they're going to be a lot smaller. And one of the things challenges that you'll have with as a game master is keeping your sessions kind of low key in regards to file size, how many assets you have shared, all those sort of things. It all adds up, and it makes for a little bit more stable and a lot less lag if you optimize your work. It does take extra work, though. I'm going to tell you, it does increase your workload. So if you don't have the time for it, don't do it. But you're at the risk of creating extra drama when it comes to running the table, and then you got one player that can't connect because their system may not be up to par, or maybe they're having network issues, or maybe their antivirus is blocking them, or whatever it may be. But this kind of thing will be much better if you actually convert your images to WebP if you're able to, and that really helps keep the campaign to a minimum, and the size isn't going to be too crazy. The main thing on maps, though, is you just want to make sure that these maps are not too huge. I think this is a good happy medium here. It's not too large dimensionally, but it's not so tiny that you can't display what you're trying to get across to your players. Now, this particular set of maps came with an overall map that I'm not going to share with the group. And that one is kind of for me. And all it is a kind of an overview. So this is the map here in this area. This map is the Tribord Trail, which is the next area that I need to set up. And I'm going to put the traps and stuff in here. And then this last one is the Kragma hideout that we went over in episode 2. So this is just a kind of a way that they had created this map to kind of show you an overview of the region. So these regional maps can be bigger, obviously, but this is converted into a WebP file, so it's not too huge file size wise, but dimensionally it's pretty big, especially this vertical dimension here. It's pretty long. If I put this all the way up to scale, this thing is pretty big. So you don't really need those big maps for combat so much, because that would be very annoying because you have to keep moving the map around. And if you have the setting in Fantasy Grounds as auto center map, if you have that turned on, it's going to move the map to the player, which isn't a problem for players. But if you're a game master and you have your table set to a certain size, your map set up, you don't want it moving around. So you want to turn that option off, especially on larger maps. So this is something that I would just use for myself as a regional map, as opposed to having a gigantic map for the region, like an overall overland map. So an overland map would be good for other reasons, like political boundaries, getting from Neverwinter to Phandelver, those sort of things. So those you would share with your player occasionally, or you just kind of leave that shared, and then they can look at it and they can see where they're at on the map. You can even create an NPC token to kind of represent where they move to as a group. You can do something like that. But generally speaking, you don't want huge maps shared across the network. That's kind of I wouldn't say it's a no-no, but you'll find out eventually what the limitations of the network is and of Fantasy Ground. So it is something that you got to kind of pay attention to. So this map here, I'm not going to share it. There's no reason for me to. This is just for me, for reference. So the other thing I wanted to get into was the conversion of the images. So this is kind of the work, kind of the boring part, but it is actually very important to go over this, because this is where the rubber meets the road, right? I can show you all this fancy stuff and, oh, I did this, and look at my fancy map. That's just not what this is about. I really want to show you what the work that goes into this and make you understand that. So when you go about creating your own content, you understand the type of work that goes into it, but then you also appreciate why you're paying all this price, for all this stuff, because some of the stuff can be a little costly. And when you realize how this stuff goes together and how much work's put into it, then you go, okay, that's what I'm paying for. So generally you get newer users or people that have kind of got an attitude or a problem with rebuying books and such. But what you don't realize often is what it took to convert it from a PDF or a file into Fantasy Ground. So that's where the work is, and that's generally what you're paying for, other than the storage and the upkeep and the maintenance and all that kind of stuff. So that all factors into the cost of a product in a virtual tabletop format. It took somebody some time to do that, and to get some of that money recouped back is an important aspect of running a business. So if you're going to be doing a conversion, you want to be compensated for that. So the person who does the work generally gets a percentage, and then Smiteworks get a percentage, and then everything else probably goes to Wizards of the Coast, so they get their cut too. So we're just talking about D&D right now. I don't know what the exact numbers are, but when you're buying a module or anything that's like an asset or anything, you're paying the artist, you're paying the work to convert it, and you're paying for the license and all that stuff. So that's what you're paying for, not just the book. So some people says, well, I already purchased the books on D&D Beyond, and I have the physical books. Right, that's true. There's no getting around that. But when you buy the digital version, you're taking and purchasing the work that went into converting it, and that's really where the rubber meets the road. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. So in Fantasy Grounds, in my assets folder, this is what I have for assets, but they're all in PNG format. So I'm going to take you to that folder, and this is a subfolder that I have. There's one for maps, one for assets. So I'm going to open this up, and I will enlarge it so you can see what's going on here. So these are the PNG assets. That's what's on the map right now. You don't want to move these files or rename them after they're attached to a map already in Fantasy Grounds. So since I already have these assets attached to a map, I'm going to redo them potentially, and I'm going to leave these files in here for reference. I'm not going to take those away until I'm done redoing the maps. And I don't mind doing this because I'm trying to show you the difference and why you would convert these and that sort of thing. So at the moment, these files here, if I highlight these and right click on them, and you can actually, or even if you just do this and you just do your tooltip it tells you that each file has a certain size. So this one's 141 kilobytes. They're all 512 by 512 dimension, by the way. This one's 135. This one is 85. And this one is 88. So you add all those together, and you're likely to have, you know, at least a, let's see, this whole folder is what? So if I right click on it, go to properties, yeah, so it's about half a megabyte, which isn't really bad. But you can imagine if you have an entire campaign, this is only chapter 1. So I have chapter 2 is way bigger. So I'm going to have a lot more work in that one. And there's going to be a lot more files, and the file size are going to add up. So with anticipating doing all 4 chapters, then I'm going to convert these over to a WebM file. So in this case, I'll use GIMP, but you can use whatever program you're comfortable with. I believe there's some free options out there. The only thing I don't know is that if they have a batch convert, which is what I'm going to use here. So this is the GIMP program, and I actually have a plugin or a free kind of a extension or plugin for this. This is the batch image manipulation. And you hit F1, you can get more help. But basically, you can open this up, and you can tell it what you want it to do, and you can put these input files. And this time, I'm going to make sure I tell it where I want it to go, because last time I had a hard time finding where the images went because I didn't change the output folder. So I'm going to actually probably add the images first. So it allows you to add it as single images or folders or all the opened images if you did it that way. But I'm going to go to a folder. And what I want to do is navigate to the Fantasy Grounds folder. So instead of trying to dig through my entire hard drive, what I know where these things are generally stored in Fantasy Grounds, but instead of trying to do it that way, what I'll do is I'll just take the individual files from that folder that I had up earlier and drag those over. So I know where those are at, and I already have them open. So what I'm going to do is take these and drag them into, I'm going to close this for now, but I'm going to take all 4 or 5 of these. How many we got? Yeah, there's 5 files. Take all those, drag those into GIMP, and then I'll do the actual conversion. So these are all these are all PNG files. So I'm going to convert these to WebP. So with the batch convert, I'm going to go to batch image manipulation. And in this case, I want to keep the folder hierarchy. I want to add images, but I'm going to say all opened images. So that takes care of all the ones that I have open in the queue up here. And then I'm going to take the manipulation set, and you got resize, crop, all these sort of things. The only thing I want to do is change format and compression. Right now, it's default at JPEG. So I'm going to go to WebP. And then the quality that they recommend on the developer's guide for Fantasy Grounds is 75. You don't have to change that, especially if you're using it for your own usage. You can leave it at 100%. I'm just going to follow the guidelines that they give you on the Atlassian wiki, because it tells you kind of the general format, dimensions, those sort of important things, especially if you're going to do a conversion. So I'm going to go ahead and change that to the 75 and hit OK. And then I want to change the output folder, because this is kind of where I went wrong last time. So I want to output it. I'm going to put it in the same folder that I had stored the images before on my in my downloads folder. And I'm going to go ahead and do that first. So I'm not going to put it in the folder that I'm opening from, but I am going to store them in a subfolder so that I can more easily find these. So I have this thing, a dead horse, these are the PNG files. So I'm just going to hit OK. And then once I do that, now it's going to go into that folder. I'll know where they went. Last time I did this, I lost track and I had to dig for them. So I'm going to go ahead and hit apply. So it's going to take those batch files and convert those over to a WebP format, and then we'll compare the actual sizes. So that's no errors, so you want to look for that, make sure there was no conversion errors. One of the things I noticed is if you try to do too many large files, it'll error out. I learned that lesson on some big maps. So try to keep your batch sizes smaller, like maybe 1 to 3 maps if they're huge. You know, so anyways, because I think you run out of virtual memory or something happens like that. So I'm gonna hit close. I don't need to hit apply again. And I'm gonna go ahead and close this. So now I do have both versions now. I have the WebP version and I have the other version. So I'm going to make another subfolder. And what I'm going to do is just create a folder and then I'll just call it WebP. So folder, I'll say WebP. And then once I get everything resituated, then I'll just get rid of the PNG assets. So these are all the WebP format. And we're going to compare what size this folder is, because the other one was like half a megabyte or something like that. So I want to go ahead and move these over. So I want to also be careful not to move these over because they're already part of my scene in the maps. And this is where a lot of people go wrong. They'll make a map and then later on they'll decide, oh, I want to move these to a different folder or rename them or whatever. When you do that, it corrupts the map if you've kind of made your own assets. And if they're already a part of a scene or you got it part of a map, it screws that up. So then you get a red question mark and what's wrong? Fantasy Grounds is broken. No, it's not. You actually renamed and moved the files around. So you got to kind of do this in the beginning instead of waiting until halfway through your work and decide you want to move everything around. So that's where the problem comes in. I've done this to myself so many times, I think I got some authority on it. So anyways, these are the WebP files. And they're still got the transparency and everything. So what I'm going to do is compare this. So this is now 120 kilobytes. And if you hover over one of these other ones, it's at 88 kilobytes. So just this folder alone is smaller than any one asset just about. So like this particular cart with all the artwork and the driver, that's 141 kilobytes just for that PNG file. But this entire folder with the WebP assets is actually less than that. It's 120. This one is 141. So the compression ratio is anywhere between, it's 75 to, 60% smaller than what you'd have before. So if you divided it up, 25-30% is quite a bit of difference of the original file size. So that's a big plus when it comes to managing campaign size and the size of a module. So if you're going to create a commercial module or something that you're going to sell or something that you want to send, you don't want a huge 10 gigabyte folder. You want it to be as slimmed down as possible. So using the WebP format is the way to go. So this is something that it will come into play not only for commercial use, but when you're sharing this across a network, not only are your dimensions going to be too big, but they can also have file sizes that are too big. So it takes longer to transfer the images. So you got two things going against you there. And some people, or most people, are using wireless networks, which don't inherently always have the best transfer rate. So that's another thing you got to consider when you're making these things. If you're just going to use the content that comes from a module that is store purchased, you get it off the Fantasy Grounds store, generally those are already optimized. They shouldn't give you that much grief. Occasionally a map will be pretty big because that's the way that Wizards of the Coast or whoever the author is had assigned it to be. Fantasy Grounds and Smiteworks has already optimized those. So you don't have to normally worry about those. It's normally this third-party stuff or things that you're making for yourself that cause that issue. And quite often it's maps. Those are generally way too big dimensionally and file size wise. So you kind of want to find something that's more of a happy medium and that has maybe not already doesn't have the the grid painted on there, because that's another thing that happens. Like you'll pick up a map and try to put it in Fantasy Grounds, and the grid doesn't line up with the Fantasy Grounds grid. So there's lots of little things, little nuances that can really piss you off if you're not used to the process. I just want you to understand the work that goes into it. So now that I've done that, what I want to do is refresh. So whenever you make changes in Fantasy Grounds, whether it be adding files, taking them away, renaming them, switching them around, you want to go ahead and hit this refresh assets. So now I have a subfolder. This is the WebP, and these are the folders. This is the content here. So I want to bring up my map, and I'll show you the process of adding these in instead of trying to make it a token that moves around or whatever. So I'm going to bring that map back up. So we're going to go to Images, and we're going to go to the Goblin Ambush map. And that's not the complete one. We want the road one. And here are the assets. So what I'm going to do is swap these out for these ones. The blood drops come from Smiteworks or the art subscription pack. So I'm not worried about those. It's just the 2 horses. So what I'm going to do is unlock the map. I'm going to take the 2 dead horses that are here and just delete them. Just outright delete them. So if I highlight the horse and hit delete, it should, there's a delete button down here. It should get rid of it. So there's one of them. And this bottom one here, I'm going to do the same thing. Okay, so that got rid of the horses. So, that seemed like a waste of time, but in reality, I don't care or mind because I want to show you how this works. So that's that part of it, and that's if you ever have to go and delete an asset. So the next step is to re-add them. So in this folder, the subfolder, I'm going to click to the Layers tool, and I'm just going to add these as a stamp. You have the tile tool here, the stamp tile. So what I'm going to do is click to the stamp tile, and I'm in Layers mode. Drag over this asset and drop it in there. And it's set at this big astronomical number. I'm not too worried about that, but you can adjust that on the fly if you need to. But I'm going to go ahead and click here and see what we get. So that's going to be this horse over here. And you can rotate these at this point if you want. So before you stamp it, you can actually rotate this. You can recolor it. You can do all kinds of stuff. So one of the things I like to do with assets like this is back off the transparency a little bit. And the reason for that, or I want to put transparency on it, because it helps it blend in, kind of smooths it into the map a little easier. So now when I click on here, there's the horse. It looks about the right size for scale. It's a little big. So what I might do at this point, since I already have it selected already, is maybe I will change it to 6.5 or something like that. You could do that. So this thing is 1, 2, 3, 4 squares wide. So that's why I'm saying that. So what I can do at this point is hit Control Z, or you can go and just delete it again if you want. So highlight the horse, and then you can hit the delete key if you want. Go back over, re-drag this asset, and you'll see the size up here. So I might go with 6.5 before I place it. And then that will make sure that it kind of fits within 3 squares instead of being huge. And then also take the color picker thing, and I'm actually going to turn the opacity down just a hair. So these are at 255. I put this alpha channel at 250. And now I'm going to click again, and that's scaled a lot better. So the next horse, I'll know what to scale it at. So that's the way you do this. And then I'll take this pointer, click on the layer select, make sure I have the horse highlighted, and move it closer to the blood splatter so that it kind of goes with the wound. So that's how you move these things around. You want to make sure you're on the layer selection tool, because quite often you'll select a layer and go, oops, you'll accidentally add another layer of this horse, in other words. So I'm going to be careful with that. So the next one, I'm going to go ahead and drag that over, drop it in here. It's at 7.3 again, so I'll go 6.5 because I have an idea of the size I want. And then the tint will be where I recolor this, so I'm not going to recolor it, but I'm going to lower the opaqueness. I'm going to put a little bit of transparency in it, just a touch, and hit OK. And I'm going to rotate it a little bit, so I don't want it the exact same direction as this horse. So I'm going to rotate it up so it's kind of going this way instead of this way. And I'll drop that right about here. And there we go. So now, if I need to move it, I'm going to go to the layer selection tool and make sure I'm on the correct layer. Move this closer to the blood splatter. And there we go. So now that is a part of the scene. I removed the content that I don't want anymore. And I don't have anything assigned for these guys yet, so I don't have to worry about that. The only thing I had to worry about are the two horses. So I'm going to go ahead and close the map. And I'm going to lock this prop area so they don't get moved. I'm also going to lock the map so that I don't accidentally move that. And then I'm going to lock the map. We're ready to go. Okay, so it didn't change anything else. We just changed the assets. Now at this point, what I'm going to do is go back into the back end and delete the PNG files because I won't need those. They're duplicate. So if I go to folder, I'll be back into this area. Here's the assets folder. I can actually remove these safely now. So I'll hit delete. And delete there. And now I have this WebP folder. Now I'm not going to change the directory because if I change that, it's going to potentially break that. Let's just do it. Let's see what happens. Now I got to prove this theory. I could be wrong. I don't mind that. So I'm going to go ahead and cut these out. And I'm going to go ahead and put those in a different directory. I'm going to move them. I'm going to delete this folder. And this is where I would have normally had them anyways. However, if I pull that map back up, first I want to go to the assets and I want to refresh. So I'm going to refresh this. And now there's nothing in that. There's no folder. So now I have to go back to this layer. So here is the actual layer where the assets are. So now I want to check the map. So let's go take a look at the map. Did I screw it up? Maybe. So if I go over to the road map, open that up, what do you know? No horses. So don't do that. So that's what a lot of people end up doing with their assets is they will go in and decide that they want to rename stuff, move stuff around, and then they end up breaking or busting their map because they change things, they move directories, they change the file names, whatever. And even with updating this refresh assets, it screws it up. So don't do that. So this is the map and decor. And see, the entries are still here, but they're not the actual files that are associated with it. So I'm going to go ahead and delete those and start over again. And yes, this seems like a lot of redundancy, but I want to show you the type of crap that goes on when you're doing this stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and take this and go back to layers mode and going to go back to the horse and move it a little bit. So there it goes. It kind of matches where I want it to go. And then do the same thing over here with the dead horse, the other one. So again, I'm going to bring that over. It goes to stamp mode automatically. I'm going to go to 6.5 is what I determined is a better number for scale. And then again, I can come down here and turn down the opacity. So I forgot to do that on the first one. That's all right. I can go back, fix it. And then I'm going to rotate it. So I want the horse facing the other direction or a different direction. And go ahead and click there. So now I'm going to go to the selection layer tool and make sure I'm on the same layer with this thing and put it right there. So this is really the work that goes into doing these types of maps. So now that you have that here, Then I'm going to take and lock this because I don't want it to move. And then I want to go back over to this horse and select that layer and turn down the opacity a little bit like the other one. And what that does is it kind of gives it kind of blends in with the map a little better because you got these hard lines, and if they're too hard, they stick out like a sore thumb. So kind of want them to blend in with the map just a little bit. And then after that, I'm going to lock all the assets up so I can't accidentally, move them around or break them. And I do like the location, so I'll leave it there. And the audio drop, maybe. I mean, I didn't change anything on my settings, so not sure if that changed anything or not, but I don't know. Got no commercial audio, but no you. Huh. Interesting. I don't know. It could be something. I don't know. But anyways, I'm going to get going. Everything's registering on my end. Hopefully it fixes itself or writes itself. I don't know. But anyways, take care, everyone. You have a good holiday. And I will see you guys. Yeah, I don't know what it did, but I think it did drop. Because now I'm seeing it says Fantasy Grounds Academy is now live streaming. So I'm going to get going anyways. You didn't miss much. I was just saying that I was going to do the next map and going to add the assets to it. A couple traps, and I want to show how that works. And then we'll move on to Chapter 2. So take care, everyone. Have a good holiday. I'll see you around, and I'm going to go